Snow clung to the palace gates like frost-laced lacework as Lady Eleanor Hargrave stepped down from the modest carriage that carried her through London's winter dusk. Her breath caught in the frigid air, though she steadied herself with practiced grace. Tonight marked her reluctant return to society after 3 years of widowhood, and every step toward the royal ballroom felt like trespassing upon a life she no longer belonged to. Yet duty, stern, unyielding, and merciless, had summoned her, and she obeyed because obedience was the one thing life had never stripped from her. Inside, chandeliers blazed with unforgiving brightness, scattering light across silks, jewels, and polished boots. The royal winter ball, orchestrated to soothe tensions between England and Scotland, pulsed with uneasy grandeur. Eleanor felt the weight of scrutiny before she had fully entered the room. A widow at 28, with no fortune and no family name of particular consequence, was an easy mark for whispers. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to bow to murmured judgment. But judgment came swiftly. Near the refreshment table, 2 matrons, faces stiff with powdered pride, leaned together like vultures in brocade. "Poor thing," one murmured, eyes sliding toward Eleanor. "A widow should keep to the shadows." The other offered a brittle laugh. She must still imagine herself worth noticing. Heat pricked Eleanor's cheeks, though she kept her expression serene. She reminded herself that grief had carved deeper wounds than gossip ever could. As she moved through the crowd, a young lord brushed her shoulder with careless disdain. "Beg pardon, madam," he muttered without looking. "I had not realized someone was standing quite so still." The remark, sharp in its indifference, cut deeper than open cruelty. Eleanor inclined her head, swallowing the sting. She wondered briefly why she had come, why she had allowed herself to believe she might be received with civility. Then the music shifted, and a hush rippled through the hall. Eleanor followed the change instinctively, her gaze drawn toward the grand entrance. There, framed by the golden archway, stood Alastair MacCrae, Duke of Strathmore. Tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably Highland. He commanded the room with a quiet authority that required no announcement. His dark hair caught the chandelier's glow, and his storm-gray eyes held the aloof composure of a man accustomed to balancing power and peril. Eleanor felt her breath hitch. The court's fascination with him was palpable. Scotland's fragile political relationship with England rested partly upon his family's restored favor. His presence tonight was not a social courtesy but a diplomatic necessity. Yet beneath the formality, there was something solitary in his bearing, a distance she recognized too well. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Their first meeting was accidental, or seemed so. Near the balcony, where cool air offered temporary refuge, their paths converged. He paused upon seeing her, offering a small yet unmistakably respectful bow. She curtsied in return, startled by the sincerity in his gaze. For a brief moment, the noise of the ballroom faded, leaving only the quiet acknowledgment of 2 people unexpectedly seen. She moved away, determined not to linger, but fate proved stubborn. Their paths crossed again near a narrow archway where the crowd bottlenecked. Their hands brushed, lightly, fleetingly, yet the contact sent a surprising warmth through her. Eleanor drew back at once, chastising herself. A duke did not seek the company of a widow with no influence. She refused to indulge in foolish imaginings. Seeking respite, she slipped into a side corridor where candlelight glowed softly upon marble walls. The distant music softened to a hum. Alone at last, Eleanor allowed herself a single steadying breath. But as she turned to leave, she froze. The Duke of Strathmore stood at the corridor's far end, as though drawn by the same invisible thread that had tugged at her all evening. For several heartbeats, neither spoke. Silence settled around them, not uncomfortable but charged with an awareness that defied explanation. Eleanor felt her instinct to retreat, to avoid further misinterpretation, battling with an inexplicable pull to remain. His gaze held none of society's mockery, only a quiet recognition that unsettled her more deeply than disdain ever had. "I fear I have intruded," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "You intrude nowhere, Lady Hargrave," he replied, his voice warm despite its restraint. "I sought a moment's reprieve from the crowd." She looked up, surprised by the honesty threading through his words. "As did I," she said softly. His lips curved in a faint, almost reluctant smile, as though her answer mattered more than propriety permitted. The moment stretched, delicate as spun glass. For the first time that night, Eleanor felt the tight band of shame loosen, replaced by a fragile, dangerous hope. She sensed the corridor becoming a place set apart from judgment, a space where neither of them was required to perform the roles the world had written for them. But before she could speak again, footsteps echoed in the distance. The Duke's attention flicked toward the sound, then returned to her with quiet intensity. Something unspoken passed between them, a promise of consequence, of change, of a path neither had intended to walk. And though Eleanor knew nothing truly dangerous had yet occurred, she sensed, with startling certainty, that the night had shifted. Eleanor stood rooted, her breath shallow, her pulse tightening with a mix of fear and anticipation. She had not sought attention tonight. She had hoped merely to pass through the evening unnoticed, a shadow among brighter figures. Yet here, in this quiet corridor, a man whose position could topple kingdoms had paused because of her, spoken gently to her, looked at her as though she were not invisible. The realization unsettled and electrified her. She sensed the peril of it, the impropriety, the looming scandal, yet also the lure of something undeniably human, undeniably hers. She felt the world tilt toward a fate she could neither resist nor predict. The palace resumed its glittering orchestration of music and murmured diplomacy, but Eleanor felt as though she had stepped back into a world that no longer fit her. She stood at the ballroom's edge, hands clasped with deliberate composure, yet her senses remained anchored to the quiet corridor where the Duke of Strathmore had looked at her as though she were not merely a face in the crowd but a presence worth noticing. The moment had been brief, too brief, but its echo lingered in the hollow of her chest, stirring a mixture of exhilaration and dread. She forced herself to navigate the intricate currents of conversation, though each exchange felt hollow compared to the stillness she had shared with the Duke. Across the room, Alastair MacCrae moved with dignified restraint, pausing to greet ministers, military officers, and nobles whose approval mattered far more to his political survival than any fleeting encounter with a widow. Yet she noticed, with a sudden tightening in her breath, that his gaze drifted her way more than once. Each time, subtle, fleeting, yet unmistakably intentional. Not everyone missed it. Lady Ashcombe, sharp-eyed and eager for scandal, drifted to Eleanor's side. She lifted her fan with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "My dear Lady Hargrave," she cooed, "how interesting to see you sharing a corridor with the Duke earlier. A rather secluded corridor, at that." Eleanor stiffened, pulse quickening. "I merely sought a moment of quiet," she answered evenly. "As did many tonight." Lady Ashcombe's smirk widened. "Indeed. Yet the Duke followed only you. Curious, is it not?" The remark, soft as velvet, carried the sharpness of a blade. Eleanor refused to flinch, though every instinct warned her of danger. One misplaced rumor could unravel her meager standing entirely, and worse, jeopardize the Duke's. She reminded herself that whatever she had felt in that silent hallway was nothing more than a passing impression, one she must bury before it grew into something capable of harm. Yet as she stepped away from Lady Ashcombe's predatory smile, the weight of that lie pressed against her ribs. The evening advanced, and an official toast was called. Glasses lifted, voices echoed in reverence to unity between nations long unsettled by distrust. The Duke, positioned near the dais, accepted the praise with measured grace, though she sensed an underlying weariness in his stance. He bore the invisible burden of expectations. Scotland's hope for fair representation, England's hope for unwavering loyalty, and Eleanor wondered how a man maintained dignity beneath such conflicting demands. She was contemplating this when she felt movement at her side. Turning, she found the Duke himself beside her, an action bold enough to make her breath falter. "Lady Hargrave," he said quietly, "I trust you have not found this evening too wearisome." His tone, though polite, carried an intimacy that threatened to betray them both. Eleanor dipped her head in a subtle curtsy. "I fear I am ill-suited for gatherings of this magnitude, Your Grace. Yet I endeavor to appear at ease." His gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding. "You accomplish far more than that," he murmured. The words were soft, but their impact struck like a tremor beneath her ribs. A servant passed with a tray of letters bearing the king's seal, tokens of acknowledgment distributed to select attendees whose presence served political purpose. Eleanor watched as a letter was placed in her hands. She blinked, startled. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. But the seal was genuine, the script unmistakable. A message from the palace, addressed to her directly. The Duke's brow lifted slightly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the envelope. She hesitated before offering it to him. He examined the seal, then returned it. "There is no error. You have been summoned." She swallowed hard. "But why?" Alistair stepped closer, though still within the limits of propriety. "Perhaps the crown acknowledges your husband's service," he suggested. "Or perhaps—" He paused, expression tightening as though weighing the risk of his next words. "Perhaps someone at court wishes to see you properly regarded." Her pulse quickened. "Your Grace, if anyone believes." He held her gaze, steady and utterly unguarded. "Let them believe what they will. Truth has never been the court's highest currency." Before she could respond, Lady Ashcombe appeared once more, her curiosity sharpened by the sight of the king's seal in Eleanor's hands. My, the woman purred. "Unexpected honors this evening, Lady Hargrave. I dare say some will find this intriguing." Eleanor's chest tightened. She slipped the letter into her glove, but the gesture was futile. Whispers were already beginning. The Duke's jaw hardened. "Lady Ashcombe," he said with measured calm, "it would be wise to mind your own affairs." The rebuke, quiet yet unmistakably authoritative, startled Eleanor and silenced Ashcombe for the first time all evening. The matron's expression soured, but she retreated, reluctantly, no doubt eager to spread what she had seen. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "You should not have intervened," she whispered. "It will only give her more to speak of." "She requires no encouragement," the Duke replied. "And I will not see you maligned for receiving a royal seal." His protectiveness, unexpected and dangerous, stirred emotions she had buried beneath years of grief. He seemed to realize this, for he stepped back, restoring the delicate boundary between them. Yet the distance did nothing to diminish the heat that lingered in his gaze. A new dance began, couples sweeping into elegant formation. The Duke did not ask her to join him. Such a gesture would have set the court ablaze with speculation, but he inclined his head in a silent farewell that felt far too intimate. Eleanor watched him blend into the movement of the ballroom, though his presence remained like a steady pulse in the air. She clutched the royal letter against her palm, feeling its weight like a spark of fate she had never sought. She sensed the path ahead shifting beneath her feet. The king's summons, the Duke's quiet defiance, Lady Ashcombe's sharpened interest, all pointed toward dangers she could not yet name. Yet beneath the rising tension, a strange certainty bloomed. Her life, once silent and predictable in its solitude, had changed. Not by choice, nor by calculation, but because one man had looked at her with unguarded sincerity in a world where sincerity was forbidden. And though reason urged her to retreat, her heart whispered another truth. Whatever awaited her next, she no longer wished to remain unseen. The royal summons lay unopened on Eleanor's writing desk the next morning, its crimson seal unbroken, its meaning heavy as a heartbeat pressed beneath her ribs. She sat poised near the window, hands folded with an elegance she did not feel, watching pale winter sunlight creep across the floorboards. Despite her attempts at calm, her thoughts returned again and again to the Duke's voice, the steel in his rebuke, and the quiet sincerity that had set her world trembling. She knew the king's letter might alter her circumstances, perhaps for the better, perhaps for peril, but she sensed with growing certainty that the more dangerous shift had already occurred within her. Summoning her resolve, she broke the seal. The letter was brief, written in the clipped formality of the royal secretary. She was requested to attend a private audience in 2 days' time to discuss matters concerning her late husband's service and her standing within the court. The words were polite, almost flattering, yet their ambiguity unsettled her. Her husband had died honorably, yet no one in power had ever sought her before. Why now? And why in a moment already shadowed by whispered speculation? As she folded the letter, a knock sounded. Her maid entered, carrying a small parcel wrapped in dark blue silk, no insignia, no signature. "Delivered by hand, my lady," the maid murmured. Eleanor dismissed her gently before untying the ribbon. Inside lay a single object, a worn naval compass, its brass casing polished by years of touch. Her breath caught. It was identical to the compass her husband had carried throughout his service, but his had been lost at sea with him. Beneath it lay a folded note. She opened it with trembling fingers. Your husband served with courage. His memory should not be used by those who seek advantage. A.M. Her pulse stilled. She traced the initials, recognizing the Duke's careful restraint woven through the message. It was not a declaration, not even an intimacy, yet the meaning beneath the words reached her more deeply than any overt sentiment could have. He sought to protect her, not from gossip, but from forces greater than rumor. She closed her eyes, steadying herself against the swell of gratitude and fear. Their bond, still fragile and unspoken, had become something others might call dangerous. The day of the audience arrived cloaked in gray clouds. Eleanor traveled to the palace in a borrowed carriage, her navy cloak drawn tightly around her. When she entered the antechamber outside the king's private council room, she found herself unexpectedly accompanied. Alastair MacCrae stood waiting, his posture straight, his expression composed yet shadowed by a tension she had not seen before. He bowed. Lady Hargrave. She curtsied, her voice quiet. Your Grace. I had not expected. I requested to be present, he interrupted softly, should you wish for support. The simplicity of the offer struck her harder than any grand gesture. No one had stood beside her since the day she buried her husband. No one had offered anything without expecting something in return. She felt the old instinct to protect her solitude rise, yet beneath it formed a new, fragile trust. Thank you, she said at last, her voice threaded with sincerity. I am grateful. Before either could say more, a chamberlain summoned her inside. The audience was formal, brief, and perplexing. The king did not appear. Instead, two senior advisers informed her that consideration was being given to granting her a small pension in recognition of her husband's service. Their tone was courteous, yet they offered no clarity regarding the sudden attention. Eleanor sensed hidden motives beneath every polished phrase, motives that had little to do with honoring her husband. When she stepped out again, she exhaled shakily. The Duke watched her with a stillness that betrayed concern. You are pale, he said. What was said? She recounted the conversation, and his jaw tightened. They mean to use you, he murmured. A pension is a pleasant veil for political maneuvering. There are factions eager to appear sympathetic toward widows of military men, and others who would use any connection to me as leverage. His expression darkened. I fear your name has become entangled in matters you should never have been drawn into. Eleanor looked up at him, her voice trembling despite her effort at composure. If I have caused any harm to your standing. You have caused no harm, he said sharply. What imperils me is not your presence. It is the cruelty of those who believe kindness a weakness. His words, low and fervent, stole her breath. She sensed him struggling to contain an emotion he dared not show. They stood alone now, the corridor empty, the door to the council room closed. Snow drifted past the tall windows, casting pale, wavering light across the Duke's face. He took a small step nearer, not impropriety, not yet, but near enough that she felt the gravity of him. Eleanor, he said, her name spoken with a tenderness that startled her. You must understand something. His voice dropped, lower than decorum allowed. I have spent years guarding every word, every gesture. I have lived beneath the scrutiny of those who expect me to atone for sins I did not commit. Yet with you, his breath caught, barely audible. With you, I do not feel measured. I feel, he stopped himself, the rest trapped behind duty and restraint. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened, but she held his gaze. You feel what? She whispered. He looked at her as though fighting a battle he feared to win. What I should not, he murmured. The admission rippled through her, frightening and beautiful. She stepped back, not to reject him, but to preserve the dignity both of them still clung to. Your Grace. Alastair, whatever this is, it cannot continue unspoken and undefined. Her voice trembled. If we allow confusion to guide us, others will shape our fate without mercy. He inhaled deeply, as though her words had struck with more force than any accusation. You are right, he said quietly. "Then let truth guide us." Eleanor hesitated, heart thundering. "And what truth do you intend to speak?" He met her eyes fully, no armor remaining. "That I am falling toward you in ways I cannot yet name, and that if this path ruins me, I will not turn from it." The confession, restrained yet devastating, left her breathless. She did not answer, not because she wished to withdraw, but because words felt too fragile for the moment. Instead, she lifted the compass he had sent her, holding it between them like a fragile bridge. The Duke's gaze softened, and for the first time, Eleanor felt the terrifying, exhilarating certainty that neither of them stood alone any longer.